Good afternoon. Okay, we're ready with that. I mean, that lunch was fantastic, fantabulous, wonderful. Yes, I thought it was pretty good. So anyways, we are ready to get started with our fireside chat. Now, there's no fire, so I want you to sort of imagine behind us that there's a nice fireside thing going on. And we are here with our panelists. What I'm going to do is we have Ben Limmer, David Kooris, and Mayor Simmons. They are all mic'd up with the lav mics. I think I'm going to sit down because at a fireside you don't stand up. And we'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And from there we've got some questions, some thoughts about mass transit here in Connecticut, something that we're all interested in. And I would just say the one overarching thing about mass transit is it's designed to get people out of their cars. Right? So please don't ask the question about trains don't pay for themselves, because we know they don't pay for themselves on a per rider basis, but when you get people out of their car and you take wear and tear on the streets and the roads and less traffic, you get way more economic vitality, and it is worth it. So I will not tolerate that question today. So anyways, let's move on and begin. And if we could just go right down the row and just introduce yourself and say hello.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, I believe. Yeah, so Ben Limmer, I am Bureau Chief of Public Transportation for ConnDOT, so I get the wonderful opportunity to oversee the state's bus, passenger rail, freight rail, as well as, of course, the ferry services. Everyone loves the passenger ferry services. Been with ConnDOT and Commissioner Euclid a little under 2 years. I started about when he started. So we have a lot going on the capital and operating front, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks. Mayor?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Simmons. I'm mayor of Stamford. I've been in this role about 3 years. Prior to that, I was in the legislature, so I like to say I'm a recovering legislator. I don't miss the drive up to Hartford, but I definitely miss the statewide policy work, and it's great to be here with another former mayor and excellent commissioner, and Ben, who we work so closely with him and his team, and of course, David Kooris, who used to head up our Downtown Special Services District in Stamford, and I'm really excited to get to connect with you all today around such an important topic around infrastructure and transportation.
Thank you, Mayor. David?
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for welcoming me here today. And Rob, thank you for the invitation and for organizing, and thank you all for coming out for this discussion. My name is David Kooris. So I'm the Executive Director of the state's newest quasi-public authority called the Municipal Redevelopment Authority. It was launched in July of this year with the express purpose of helping cities and towns build more housing and economic development around their train stations and in their downtowns. And so hopefully we'll talk a bit today about the way in which the public transit system interacts with local communities and the land use changes and economic development potential where the system meets the ground.
Terrific, and thank all of you for being here today. So what I thought we would do is we have some questions, and I'm going to have each person answer a question, but any other person can hop in if you've got ideas or you want to expand upon it, or if, frankly, we missed something. So we're going to start with you, Ben, because you're right here. I'm sorry. Okay. My apologies. Okay. So the question is, how does mass transit in Connecticut address the needs of diverse communities across the state? And if you maybe can also expand on that and say, what's planned in the future, particularly with things like the BAL and other programs that are out there?
Of course, yeah, certainly. Well, public transportation is really for everybody, of course. Our ridership, or our customers use our transportation services for a variety of uses, especially post-pandemic. We're seeing them using them, for more robust uses, using more services on the weekends and so forth. Also, there's a lot of diverse towns to serve throughout the state, so we do our best to, right-size the transit services, the frequencies, to serve each and every community. Ridership, speaking of that, it's been very strong post-pandemic. On the bus side, the bus system throughout the state is really the workhorse. We have seen bus services throughout the state, especially in Stamford, exceed post-pandemic or pre-pandemic ridership levels. We carry about 35 million people per year on the bus system. The rail system carries about 30 million people per year. The Hartford line is fully recovered, and of course the main line to Grand Central is doing very well. It's close to 85% recovered, so it certainly bodes well for the future. Speaking of the future, we've been exceptionally busy. I understand the Federal Railroad Administrator was here this morning. I saw him downtown, and he, we were ships in the night, as they call it. We have been the fortunate recipient now of over $2 billion of grant money to modernize the Hartford line, and especially the New Haven line, to work on the big 5 movable bridges, as well as modernize the railroad network. So we really have our work cut out for us, but we are certainly ready for that. Of course, the goal is to, shorten the travel time between New Haven, Stamford, into Grand Central. So we will be very busy over the next several years, to say the least. We're also working on a variety of customer experience projects, both large and small. I'll get into a couple of them, I'm sure, throughout my, throughout this conversation today. But the idea is to really reach out to our customer base as often as possible, to really take the temperature on really what they are looking for as far as public transportation types, services, how often should they come, what type of support infrastructure are they really looking for, whether it's more bus shelters. We're working on that. We're working on modernizing the way you plan for your trip and pay for your trip. And then we're also working on substantially upgrading our rail and bus stations as well. So excited about the future, to say the least.
Wow, a lot going on. A little bit of a follow-up question to this. Mayor Simmons, during COVID, we offered free bus rides in the state subsidized systems that are out there. Do you think mass transit should be free?
I do think we should work in that direction. I think we need to make mass transit more accessible for residents, for our workforce, for essential workers. I think it really was essential and beneficial during the pandemic to have those free rides. So I think that is something that we should move towards. I'll say that mass transit in Stamford is critical for our residents to get to and from work. We have the Stamford Transportation Center, which is the busiest train station in Connecticut and a critical hub for transportation for the region. About 28,000 residents pass through on Metro North through the Stamford Transportation Center every day, a majority of them commuting to New York City. So it's critical for our workforce to get to and from work. And we have a number of initiatives underway that we're working on to enhance and improve the station, a new garage that just went up, to make the station more accessible, to do TOD and workforce housing around the station. And we are grateful for the infrastructure bill and a lot of those dollars that are trickling down to our cities and towns for those improvements. But I'll also say that our bus system, our CT Transit bus system, is used by 6,000 riders daily in Stamford. It has about 19 local stops, and so that is also a critical transportation that also comes out of the Stamford Transportation Center. We are very grateful that we received a $26 million federal grant for 20 electric CT Transit buses, which is really exciting. Obviously, that's going to be better for our environment. It's going to save us on costs, and it's the first step towards really, moving forward on electrifying our fleets. So a lot of exciting things happening. I think one of the things we need to work on, particularly post-pandemic, I think obviously ridership has not gotten back up completely to pre-pandemic levels. Part of that is sort of the remote work changes that we've seen and the new kind of hybrid work week, a lot of our companies are now, saying you could be in the office 3 days, but work from home 2 days. So we're not seeing that same ridership level, although it is getting back up there. But I think we need to make it easier and more accessible to get to mass transit in Connecticut. I think we're so reliant on cars. Cars are still the main way that people get to work in Connecticut. Trains are probably second, buses are third. So the more that we can make it easier to get to mass transit. So we're working on that in Stamford right now. We're really excited. We just received a microtransit grant, which will, I think about a dozen different municipalities got these. We have about a $2.5 million grant, which will enable residents all across our city to utilize an app, and they'll be able to get nearly free rides that are paid for by the state. Thank you again to the state for this. And it'll save them time getting to and from work. So for example, if you live on the east side of Stamford, you may now have to take 2 buses to get across the city to go work at Stamford Hospital if you're a nurse, and this would allow you to get there more directly, and it'll be about 85 cents a ride. So that's a great pilot that we're working on for the next 2 years, and we're eager to see the results of that. And again, I think to your question, Commissioner, moving towards free, we should absolutely be looking at to make these systems more accessible and affordable.
Okay. David Kooris, you are always been on the cutting edge of technology. You love that stuff in all of your roles. Can you discuss the integration of new technologies such as real-time tracking systems to help enhance the commuter experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Ben mentioned some of the new ways in which riders can get tickets and pay for the system. I can say from personal experience, it has dramatically changed my own utilization of the system. I didn't used to use CT Transit all that often, even though I've got routes running right by my house to the Stamford Transportation Center. But when I was going to take the train, I would walk, or I would Uber, or get there some other way. Now you can literally track the bus on your app. You can pay for it on your app. It makes it remarkably more user-friendly. And we've seen, going back quite a few years now, a lot of the opening up of this opportunity is just through transparency and data availability on behalf of the Department of Transportation, right? So we learned many years ago that if you make the information available, other people will take advantage of that and build apps around it and start to push it out to the user base and to the prospective riders. Perfect example, there's a cafe near the South Norwalk train station, and they want people to stop in, they want people to pop in, grab a coffee on their way to getting the train or on the way to getting a bus. Because of information availability on behalf of the Department of Transportation, they could then set up a screen that shows real-time travel arrivals. So when you go in there, I can get a coffee and I can look up on the screen and I can see how long it's going to be until my train, so I could leave at the exact right moment to get onto that. And so that information exchange not only leads to more ridership and a much more user-friendly experience, but it also directly correlates to economic development, right? We talk a lot about transit-oriented communities and how to develop around our train stations, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about over this conversation. But a lot of that depends on capturing these riders who are walking by your storefront or leaving their office above your building. If they're stressed about when to get to the train or when the bus is going to arrive or how to integrate with that system, they're not stopping to shop in the store on their walk to the train, right? They're rushing to get to the train and then maybe sitting there and waiting for 10 minutes that they could have spent in a local shop, partaking in local retail if they had better information. So information is crucially important, not just to a better rider experience, not just to opening up the system to new discretionary riders, but also to creating economic development opportunities.
Great. Ben, what are the challenges? Let me just take a step back. The bipartisan infrastructure law and that program really works at trying to unite divided communities. There's literally 30 different pieces of that legislation with specific grant programs that look at reunifying communities that were split by highways or rail or whatever the case might be. But there are all challenges to doing that. So what are the challenges and opportunities in expanding the reach of CT Fast Track to underserved regions that could really benefit from mass transit?
Yeah, great question. Get that quite a bit. The CT Fast Track has been a huge success. You know, it's been in operation about a decade, carries about 10,000 people per day. It's technically what's called a bus rapid transit, so it's a very enhanced level of bus service. We are very fortunate to have a bus rapid transit that has its own street to operate on. Of course, it's on that right away, and as a result, it's actually, I don't know who ranks these things, but it's the nation's #1 bus rapid transit line as far as customer amenities, ridership, and things like that. So I say all that to say we have a lot of positive. So it's really good to be #1 and continue to get better. So that certainly bodes well for the future. Speaking of the future, I say we, big we, just finished off the Greater Hartford Mobility Study, where we were looking at a variety of mobility enhancements throughout central Connecticut, which included a whole lot of things, but it was, of course, predicated on fixing Interstate 84 and 91 to really reconnect the urban core within Hartford. But the critical components of that were to modernize the Hartford line right there near Hartford Union Station. But even more near term was to take a look at Fast Track and see where it should go next. So as part of that plan, we are looking to expand the Fast Track further east. And of course, we are also looking at more bus service on the southern end. So all of that creates huge opportunity. It's a very ambitious vision of the future, but we certainly have a well put together vision in order to do just that. You know, the challenges are going to be many. It is going to take a lot of patience, of which I don't have a whole lot, but myself. You know, there are, of course, long-term funding commitments that we will need to secure. You know, ensuring that we have all of the stakeholders aligned throughout what's going to be a very, you know, robust process to get that all built. And then making sure we have the people resources. So it's really going to take a variety of, you know, contractors, professional services firms, and so forth to really help bring that to reality. I think what's most important though is we have a great vision. The future will change. The plan's written in a way where we can pivot when and how we need to. But very, very excited about the future. So. Great question.
Yeah, and speaking of the busway, that was universally panned when it was first planned, and it actually has worked out, as you mentioned, incredibly well. And if you look at the impact on New Britain, it's a different city. Now, granted, there's a lot of other work that's been done by Mayor Stewart there, but certainly that busway has been a key component of their revitalization. So couldn't agree with you more on that. Mayor,
can I speak to that?
Sure,
just a little bit? So, you know, I think you're absolutely right. I can remember those debates, right, around the busway. At the time it was called the busway. And
I think I was leading with some of them and then negative. But.
How incredibly controversial it was at the time. But I think it demonstrates now not just the impact in New Britain, but the impact to, you know, West Hartford and Newington, the communities along the corridor, not least of which Hartford, shows the role between public transit and economic development and housing production. And what I would emphasize is, unlike other transportation modes, cars in particular, highways, where you might have an interchange and it might be a way to get on or off the highway, but then the cars can pass through and they can go anywhere. And sure, they might stop at a strip mall or they might stop at a gas station, but they're ultimately destined for some other place, a house, an office, etc. When you have a public public transit stop, a fixed route bus rapid transit corridor, or a train station, you're concentrating all that activity in one location, it becomes the origin or the destination. And so that act of public investment in that system and in that stop and in that location creates the impetus for value creation and a level of certainty so that the private sector says, I'm willing to invest in this area because I have a level of confidence instilled in me by the public sector's investment in this area as well. So I'm willing to come alongside. And so unlike a bus route that can change, right? And the buses are the workhorse of the state system, but they can go anywhere. You can move them one block aside in any given year if the demand dictates it. But that fixed location is not going to go anywhere for the foreseeable future. And so it creates the confidence so the private sector can come in and build the housing, build the jobs, build the retail, build the offices around it, knowing that it will be there. And in doing so, it creates that perpetual return, right? We can't afford to make infrastructure investments that don't add value. And we know definitively that transit is one of the best ways to add value in distinct locations within our communities, as perfectly evidenced by the New Britain-Hartford corridor.
Well said, well said. Mayor, I got a question for you. It's not on the list, but I'm just curious what your opinion is. So I got two great gifts over the last 2 years. All right. The first one was a Segway. I love that thing. And the second one is an e-bike. And as I tool around on those things, I've realized that they are, besides they're another way of getting you out of your car. Mm-hmm. And so talk to me a little bit about those kinds of devices, and there's scooters, there's all kinds of stuff now. Do you plan for those when you're laying out streets now in Stamford? Do you think that there's going to be this whole sort of e-transportation segment that you want to accommodate? And if so, how do you do it?
Sure, it's absolutely something we are looking at. I think broadly we're just looking at enhancing our bike and pedestrian infrastructure across the city of Stamford, just as other cities across the state are doing. We have a lot of sidewalks that aren't connected, bike lanes that will go down one road but then they don't connect to another. So we're trying to start with the basics of just kind of connecting the north to south of our city, east to west, so that you can get across to your destination. We're absolutely looking at, we've actually had looked at a couple different companies that do the e-scooters and the e-bikes. One of the challenges is, we really need to get the infrastructure in place first before we, go out to bid for something like that, because it just won't make sense if there's not that connected infrastructure route. There actually is one kind of smaller e-bike company that was operating down by the train station. It wasn't very heavily utilized, again, because there wasn't the certainty that you could find another one elsewhere in the city. I think when you look at the cities that have done this well, obviously New York City with the city bikes, or Washington, D.C. I used to ride one of those to work from time to time. It's so easy because on every other block you're going to find another rack, so you'll be able to get to your destination. So I think we need that infrastructure first and that certainty for residents before we pilot these. But I think they're great initiatives. I think one of the benefits is you can really leverage private sector funding for these. I think the city bike model is a great one to look at, where you get a corporate sponsor so you can help subsidize the cost for commuters using these. And then another great thing is they're fun. They're a great way to attract young people that want to work and live in your city. All the cool kids in Austin and New York City and Boston are riding these, so I think that's a great thing. But I also think it's really important that public safety is looked at with these. I know there are some cities where there's been a lot of challenges around safety, and I think it's certainly a culture shift in some of our Connecticut cities and towns where drivers aren't as used to sharing the road with people riding a bike or people riding scooters. And so I think we need to be really careful in how these get implemented to make sure that they're safely utilized.
Yeah, so do you have to create special lanes for those? Some cities have done that, through complete streets or something like that. Is that part of how you do that?
In some cases, yes. In ours, I know we were looking at a local ordinance that would specify in some areas where you would be, you could utilize a sidewalk versus a lane. So it just depends on how you designate the local ordinance.
Okay. Well, some of us graybeards like those toys too, just so you know.
That's true. They're for everyone.
They're
not
for
just
everybody,
young
that's right.
people.
And they have a remarkable impact on the air quality. I mean, if you get enough people up on those things, not on their bikes, on their cars or motorcycles, it makes a difference. David, there is a global push towards sustainability. How is Connecticut's mass transit system adapting to reduce its carbon footprint, or just from what you've seen from all the different positions you've been involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the energy panel this morning was great. I think we heard a lot from Commissioner Dykes and others about the ways in which Connecticut is decarbonizing its grid. I was on the Governor's Council on Climate Change at one point in time when we set the interim targets, and to overly simplify what we have to do for climate change, you have to decarbonize the grid, electrify as much of your vehicle fleet, transportation as you can, and electrify as much of your building heating and cooling as you can, right? If you don't do those three things, then you're never going to come remotely close to hitting those targets. The way you decarbonize the transportation system is certainly, through things like rail. We have an largely electrified rail system, which is largely fueled by low carbon intensity electricity. We are moving towards electric buses, as the mayor mentioned. A significant state grant fueled those in cities around the state. And as someone who lives right on a bus line, I used to be able to hear the bus going by. Now you can't. It is not just better for reduced emissions. It is enhanced quality of life. It's quieter. It better integrates into the community. But just like the commissioner spoke about efficiency this morning and the ways in which we can reduce the amount of electricity we need in our buildings through weatherization, similarly we need to approach the transportation sector through that lens of efficiency. And as Commissioner said, the best way to reduce emissions, the vehicle fleet turns over pretty slowly, right, in the grand scheme of things. The best way to create efficiency in the transportation system is to drive less and use your car less, right? So everything we can do to create opportunities to shift trips to buses as electric as possible, trains, mostly electric, bike, walking, the better. And I always joke, we would never think twice. The automobile system has to be continuous, right? You have to leave your driveway, get on a local road, get on a state road, get on an arterial, get on a highway. If there was even a 1 foot gap in that system, your car would fall into a ditch and it would be unusable. But we don't treat our transportation alternative system with the same rigor, right? You have to walk out your front door to the sidewalk, to the bike lane, to the local bus stop, to the BRT system, to the commuter rail, to the intercity rail. If there's a single gap in that system, it's comparably difficult to use it as if there was a gap in the roadway system. And so efficiency and transportation alternatives, and those that are less carbon intensive, require a comprehensive approach. Things like the commissioner and mayor mentioned around complete streets, things like Ben mentioned about expanding the fast track system, increasing the frequency and the reliability of rail. All of that has to come together and frankly be done simultaneously, right? If we overemphasize any one of those things at the expense of the others, we won't have that complete system that will create viable shifts away from fossil fuel cars.
Terrific, thank you.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go right ahead, Mayor. Yeah, no, go ahead.
You want to go?
Same here.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
you first.
Mayor first.
I want to echo everything David said, and I think this is one of the most important topics we need to be talking about, and I think Connecticut is really being a leader on this right now, but there's so much more we need to do. So one of the first things we did in Stamford is I signed a climate executive order, and we put together a Mayor's Climate Council. David was also our co-chair of that, which he did an excellent job of. And one of the first things we did was conduct a greenhouse gas inventory to get a sense of where we were, emitting carbon. And no surprise, transportation sector and buildings were our two biggest carbon emitters in the city of Stamford. And so we've put in concrete goals to reduce our city's carbon footprint, because we know that cities globally are responsible for over 70% of carbon emissions. So, we really want to do our part, albeit a small part of the entire planet, but do our part as the second largest city in Connecticut to reduce our carbon footprint. So we're doing everything like David said in terms of moving towards electrifying our municipal fleet. We just got another state grant through DEEP for 12 dual port chargers to start to electrify our municipal fleet. We're also, working to increase the amount of people that walk or bike or use alternate modes of transportation during the day and reduce car usage. And so we're measuring that through census data and through community surveys. We're doing a lot around parks and sustainability and trying to expand our food scraps recycling program. But I think the transportation sector is such a critical focus for Connecticut, particularly when we have one of the most congested highways in the country. We have some of the worst air pollution in the country that's having adverse health outcomes for families. There's so many critical reasons that we need to bring urgency to getting more cars off the road. So we're excited about some of the small steps we've been taking in Stamford so far, and we really want to work with the legislature next session with the state. I think what's really exciting about the bipartisan infrastructure dollars as well as the Inflation Reduction Act dollars, hoping all of those will remain a little bit longer, but those have been critical to promoting sustainability, and so much of the transportation dollars for the first time for the federal government have been tied to sustainability outcomes and environmental justice, and so I think that's something that's really inspiring that we should be taking advantage of.
Terrific. Ben?
Yeah, and we've certainly been all in on electrifying as much of our fleet as possible, both bus and rail. David mentioned it's mostly, the rail is mostly there. We are looking at, what's the feasibility of fully converting both the Danbury, Waterbury, as well as the Hartford line throughout our rail system. But on the bus side, we directly own about 650 bus vehicles throughout the state. We've received grant after grant to buy battery electric buses, as well as convert all of the facilities over time. It's going to take a little time because we need power. Luckily in Stamford's actually going to be the first facility in the state that's going to be fully electrified, so we're excited about that. Out of our 650 vehicles, we have about 65 that are battery now. We have some snazzy new ones that make it much more apparent. It's a nice electric bus, but we have many more on the way, and looking forward to seeing our goal through it being 30% by 2030, with all of our bus vehicles there by 2035. So just wanted to give a quick status update since
Sure.
Mr. Kooris brought it up.
Absolutely. There's nothing like those Amazon delivery vehicles. I almost got run over by one yesterday. I had my headset on and I didn't hear it coming up on me. They sneak up on you. Okay, I think we got about 10 minutes left, so we're going to throw it open to questions. If anybody has any question or comment or would like to add anything, feel free. If not, we can certainly. Yes, sir.
Just have a question on your thoughts on an infrastructure bank. I know the last panel was talking about matching dollars from the federal government, having enough money in the budget to come up with the matching funds to be able to leverage what the federal or state dollars are offering, and what your thoughts are and benefits of that.
Yeah, so I'll pass this along too. I think Connecticut would benefit from an infrastructure bank. You got to get over the name bank because it's not really like lending money like a bank, right? But almost, I think it was last time I looked, roughly 30 states have infrastructure banks. And the benefit is, putting my mayor hat on, the benefit is if funded the right way, and it doesn't have to be all state money, you certainly can spur private investment, NGOs can invest in these kinds of things as well, and there's a way to do that. You would have the money for a matching grant. The local match is a hurdle, believe it or not, for some people because of the uncertainty, right? Your local small towns operate on town meetings. Larger cities, we used to have referendums for borrowing. So I can't go to the voters and say, I want you to let me borrow $1 million of my match but I don't know if I have the grant yet. So please vote yes, and then we'll figure it out later on. That our voters are much more astute than that. They would never support something like that. So it's real, but the benefits are tremendous. And Massachusetts just stood one up. Rhode Island has had one for years, and some of the other communities. But I don't know if you all have any thoughts about an infrastructure bank for Connecticut. Anybody want to pick that one up, Ben? Mayor?
I'll say we'd be all for it too. And again, you probably experienced this as mayor, but it's a challenge to get the local match. And I think that uncertainty and the time that it takes to guarantee that local match can really hold up securing these federal dollars, and even in some cases could prevent you from actually applying if you don't know if you're going to have the guaranteed local match. So we would be all for having an infrastructure bank. I think it makes so much sense because there's an estimated, $5 billion over the next several years coming to Connecticut. And so making this investment would really pay off in the long term.
Thanks, man. Ben, do you want to say that?
Yeah, well said, both of you. I mean, certainly the local match is a huge hurdle, but one that we can certainly get there. But yeah, I mean, hugely beneficial and huge opportunity. The effort to make the trip from New Haven into the city, it's going to take. It's going to take time, going to take significant resources, and certainly a bank would certainly help. So fully supportive, absolutely.
And David Kooris, there's also an economic incentive for us to do an infrastructure bank. I met with a candy company. I don't think I can use their name, but they want to hire a third shift. In order to hire a third shift, they need a new parking lot, and they need the road out in front of them widened. Now, it's probably on the state's list for maybe 10 years from now because there are other priorities throughout the state, but that's 300 more employees that they could put on, and they want to pay, they're willing to pay something. So this local company could put in the infrastructure bank, let's say $1 million, borrow at a low interest another $2 million back out to be paid back over time, get their parking lot. So because right now some of their employees are Ubering in from the parking lot so far away, close to their factory, and be able to hire up completely. There's benefits to this kind of thing, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, and I'd say the concept dovetails really nicely with another idea that's complementary of just value capture, right? This idea that, as I alluded to earlier, when we create infrastructure investment, particularly transit investment that lands in a place, it creates value to the surrounding community. In the United States, we typically let that value exclusively accrue to the property owners who happen to be in that vicinity. A lot of other countries, and some places in the United States, are more creative about saying, because we've made this investment as the public, we want to take part in that value that gets created. And so the infrastructure bank, coupled with the concept of value capture, would allow you to kind of better, harness the public benefit for future public benefit. And really, it's all about creating kind of pay it forward, exponential impact, right? You don't want to create an investment over here and then move on to the next investment and then move on to the next one. You want each one to incrementally add value. You want each one to fuel into a source that provides a new tool to create the local match so that you can continue to leverage that further and further and further to attract state, federal, or private funds. And having the bank, the infrastructure bank, would be absolutely an important piece of that puzzle.
Yes.
I was wondering what the distance you look at for that value capture from that station or that place.
Yeah. So the typical distance that people talk about, sort of transit-oriented development or the transit impact, is a half a mile. I like to go to 3/4 of a mile, and I do that because it's about a 15-minute walk, and that value really, is spread by your ability to move from that station to the surrounding properties. So if you talk about a 15-minute walk, it's 3/4 of a mile. But then there's no reason why through bike lanes, through bus transit, through other mechanisms, you can't extend the value impact of that station out further. But it's half a mile to 3/4 of a mile. That's the core area of value creation.
Yeah, certainly. In a past life, I worked on some of these. I worked for Mayor Reed within the city of Atlanta. And how they did it there is it also depended on what type of land use it was. So the single family residential was left out of what was called the tax allocation district, but the TAB money would be collected from growth that surrounded certain projects, especially major ones. It wasn't only transit, and then all of those monies would be put back into that community to build more services or whatever it might be. So it's both geographic, but it's also could be land use.
And to the commissioner's point early on about kind of, the subsidy, right? The transit subsidy and how we have to look at the whole ledger. You can't just look at that one bottom of the column and say, well, we're subsidizing transit trips, so we're losing money on this. No, you have to look at the reduced impact on the roads. You have to look at the reduced congestion. Similarly, if we're getting revenue from the development that happens around the station, that is just another column in the ledger that justifies that ridership subsidy. It reduces the ridership subsidy because there's more riders built in to the development that's around the train station, but it's also another column of public benefit that have to be viewed in their totality when we think about the positive impacts of transit investment.
Good. Okay, we have about 3 minutes left, so I thought we could do a speed round here. David, since you just got done speaking, we're going to start with you.
Sure.
So try to keep it to like a minute, minute and a half, and keep your answer focused to the issue of mass transit, transportation, infrastructure, that kind of thing. Tell me what keeps you up at night about the state of Connecticut's infrastructure situation, if you will.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. What keeps me up at night is we had, I think, one of the greatest competitive advantages based on our historical development pattern around our rail system, in our downtowns, around our trolley system. And I think we've lost that a bit with sprawl of the latter half of the 20th century. And when I look at places like Atlanta, Salt Lake City, Denver, Phoenix, they are racing to build the kind of infrastructure that we had to begin with. And so what keeps me up at night is remember where we came from, go back to those core competencies, leverage that transit infrastructure that we have, and it can be the key to unlocking generations of prosperity.
Absolutely right. In the 1950, the Danbury line was electrified. Yep. Now we're looking to go back and re-electrify it. So you're 100% right. And I love trolleys. What's wrong with trolleys? We need more trolleys. Mayor, what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night around infrastructure is public safety and the potential for a cyber attack. I think increasingly all of these systems are so connected digitally and through technology. So we're doing a lot of work right now to conduct cybersecurity tabletop exercises, and that's where you bring together all of your infrastructure leads, your public safety head, your fire, police chief, and you conduct a scenario that could be based on something that's real that has happened in another city, or a hypothetical scenario, but a lot of them are centered around if there's a potential bomb or active shooter situation at a train station, if there's an attack that could shut down our grid or our electric or our water system, and just how disruptive and damaging that would be to the health and wellness of our residents and the safety of our residents, how damaging it could be to privacy concerns and exposing data, but also just how disruptive it could be to our economy and could literally cost millions and millions of dollars. So that's what keeps me up at night. We're doing a lot of work around that, and I think we have a long way to go to bolster our cyber defenses as a state, and particularly as local cities and towns. We have a lot of work to do.
Good answer. Ben, what keeps you up at night?
So I sleep perfectly fine all the time, but if I had to pick one thing, I mentioned the $2+ billion grants, so federal grants that we've gotten. We've certainly have a very robust capital plan, especially for the main rail line. We're looking at rebuilding 4 bridges that are 100 years old. We're looking at billions of dollars modernizing the power, the network, the railroad itself. But meanwhile, Amtrak has plans to double its ridership nationwide, but in particular between Boston and Washington and even Harrisburg they mentioned. They're looking at going from 4 trains per day to 1 train per hour. They're looking at heavily investing in the Northeast Corridor rail service, and this also includes through Springfield. On top of that, we're looking at expanding on our own schedule. And so how are you going to rebuild these bridges and invest all this money all at the same time, frankly, without either shutting down or limiting traffic on the 4 rail lines? So it's going to be a huge challenge. So we are running every scenario under the sun to see how we can best serve customers long term, but also get the work done. Because people want a modernized railroad, and we're certainly doing everything we can to get there. Of course, the contractors, construction folks, they're like, "I'll just shut it down, we'll do it." But then, the railroad operators are trying to, we have a lot of people to serve and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a balancing act. I have no balance, but plan on walking on top of the fence to see how much of this we can get done.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And let's give a round of applause to our panel. They're awesome. Thank you. And Rob, I think we're ready for the next panel. Okay, thank you very much.